Airing first on Asheville FM, WSFM-LP 103.3 in Asheville, North Carolina, this is The Final Straw, a weekly anarchist and anti-authoritarian broadcast and podcast emanating out of occupied Tsalagi land in southern Appalachia. We bring you voices from struggles for liberation from all around the world. This week on the show, we bring you the audio of an activist panel from the recent queer conference held online by University of North Carolina, Asheville, in March of 2021. The conference was entitled Fitting In and Sticking Out, Queer Visibilities and the Perils of Inclusion, and the panel featured 4 local to Asheville, North Carolina, and regional groups working at different intersections of the queer community. We will learn about the work these groups do, the particular issues that affect Southern queers, the changes in visibility and inclusion for queer community, and building a larger coalitions for liberation. The panel featured members of Youth Outright, Southerners on New Ground or SONG, Transmission Prison Project, and Pansy Collective. More info on the groups can be found in our show notes. Thanks so much to the guests for allowing us to record the proceedings. The Final Straw is a proud member of the Channel Zero network of anarchist podcasts, and here's a jingle from another member of CZN.
Hello. If you are listening, then you are here on purpose. This is Twin Trouble, the podcast about fighting the system and staying rebellious while incarcerated. The show takes the form of a recorded phone call between my twin brother, currently locked up in a federal transfer overflow jail in Grady County, and myself in the free world of Chicago. Jared, why are we talking about prison abolition?
The reason why they do this whole prison thing, basically, they keep people's voices down. They want to shield the public from the day-to-day experiences of what people who are incarcerated are going through. I'm not going to take this sitting down or bent over. I'm standing up and I'm going to continue to speak my mind about what's going on. So I hope that with these series of podcasts that we can get something going, we can set it up. So Jay, we got a busy episode, don't we?
That's right. I am Jason.
And I am Jeremy. We are Twin Trouble.
Twin Trouble is part of the Channel Zero network. Listen on SoundCloud or Apple Podcasts.
Okay, so welcome everyone. This is our final event of the first day of the 2021 Queer Studies Conference. So happy to see you all here, and we made it through the day. And this is a really special panel because we've invited representatives of local organizations and groups that do work in the community in the region to help queer community, and we'll hear more about the work that they do specifically. But this is in the spirit of the conference, which is going back to its founding, conceived as a way of having academics and organizers and activists meet to talk about queer issues. So this is special to highlight the work that queer folks are doing on the ground. So I'm going to be moderating. My name's Scott, and I'm going to now turn it over to each of our panelists to introduce themselves, the group that they represent, and give a brief overview of the work that the group does in the community and beyond. And then we'll get into more involved discussion from there. I can name y'all, or if someone wants to just go ahead. If the spirit's calling you.
All right, I will jump in here so that then I can sit back and listen to all the rest of you. Hello, I'm glad y'all are all here. My name is Leroy Kite. I use they, them pronouns, and I'm here with Transmission Prison Project. We are a queer and trans-powered abolitionist books to prisoners group that serves the entire country, with a few exceptions of states that have banned us. And we are sister organizations, sibling organizations with Asheville Prison Books, which just serves general population prisoners in North Carolina and South Carolina. For those of you that are Asheville specific, we are located out of the back of downtown Books and News. Can drop by and see us. And yeah, we've been around for like a little over 20 years somehow. So a very long time. It's kind of a mystery to me how that has really sustained this long. I've been involved for about 7 years, and there is some historical memory losses. There's just been a lot of turnover over those 2 decades. Basically, we are still in the process of reconnecting with the origins of how this group began, and trying to call up those long lost elders of this project so that we can kind of seam some of the pieces together of what has changed from then and now. But that pretty much gets up to date, the arc of our work is we receive requests from prisoners around the country across the LGBTQIA and Two-Spirit spectrum and mail them back books that they are asking for, whether that is romance, thriller, sci-fi, erotica. We try to highlight getting people materials that a lot of other organizations are either unwilling or under-equipped to send to those populations, particularly when it comes to things that regard people's sexual and gender autonomy. That's an area that it can be very, very hard to find free resources from organizations that are willing to send that to people. So that's kind of one gap that we see ourselves filling that's kind of unique. And with that, I will pass it off to whoever wants it. Thanks.
I can pop in. My name is Adrian. I use they, he, and she pronouns. I'm the executive director of Youth Outright, WNC. We are a support and advocacy organization for LGBTQIA young folks between the ages of 11 and 20, which kind of bled up to 24 during COVID. Thanks for dropping our link, Sean. So our programs focus in on racial justice, gender justice, and sex and relationship education. So right now we're running programs Tuesday through Thursday. We have chat rooms on Tuesday and Thursdays that are held on Discord. And we have a video call on Wednesdays that runs 6 to 8 p.m. And those programs are run by Brian Thompson, our youth programs manager, and they've been doing a great job there. We also do some work supporting the GSA clubs across the state of North Carolina. If you're not familiar with GSAs, those are gender and sexuality alliances, formerly known as gay straight alliances. And those clubs really vary between social support and activist groups, but we support them wherever they're at and with whatever they have self-determined to be their goals, right? So if they're focused on building community with each other, that's awesome. We'll talk to them about that. If they're looking at changing policy at their school, also awesome. And we'll talk about that. We try to meet them with wherever they're at and with what their goals are. Self-determination is really important to our work. Over the past few years, we've been really incorporating youth leadership into all the way up through the board level. And so that's been really important to us as we progress. And we like to create professional opportunities for young people as well. We had some part-time youth staff positions last year as educators and facilitators. There'll be more opportunities for that later this year. And we've provided stipends for peer education around sex ed or mental health, different things like that. In 2019, we held a GSA summit. We hope to do that again. We were a little shooken by the pandemic, as most folks were, so we had to postpone that, but we're looking at a virtual version soon. Keep an eye out for that. And beyond the direct youth services, the GSA work, we also do advocacy around policy. So we've been working with Campaign for Southern Equality around the Department of Public Instruction's name policy within the virtual learning system. We were seeing last year that a lot of trans young people were being outed just by the virtual learning system. And so we now do have a preferred name field that will be integrated into Buncombe County, and implementation is happening now. We work with Equality North Carolina on things like non-discrimination ordinances here in Asheville and surrounding counties. And we're also working right now to put together a storytelling campaign around the anti-trans sports bill that just hit earlier this week. So we're working with some trans athletes at a couple different high schools to uplift their stories and really raise awareness to that. One last little plug I'll make is for our racial justice and gender justice panels, which happen once a month on our Instagram Live. And that's Space, a digital place to talk about race, and Time, TYME, Trans Youth Movement and Education. And those panels are led by young college and high school trans folks, digging in deeper to racial and gender justice. And I'll stop taking up space.
I'm happy to go next. Hi, everyone. My name is Monse. I use they or she pronouns, and I'm here repping SONG, or Southerners on New Ground. We are a 28-year-old LGBTQ base building membership organization. We are definitely unapologetically abolitionists, Black and brown, and all things queer and magic. So we have chapters all across the Southeast. We have chapters in Georgia, Alabama, South Carolina, North Carolina, Tennessee, and Louisiana. We currently don't have an Asheville chapter, but we have lots of Asheville members who in the past couple of years have been engaged in our bailout action that we have done for Mother's Day, where we have raised money to pay the bills of Black mothers and caregivers who are in jail due to bail. And this was definitely to bring awareness to the issue of money bail used as a racist, classist practice in not only Buncombe County, but all across the South, where folks are held pretrial, so before their conviction. And if they don't have the money to pay to get out, they have to stay in jail and await their court date, when people who do have access to wealth or money can wait for their court date from the comfort of their own home. So further criminalizing folks who are already targets of the state. So Song was founded in 1993 by 3 Black lesbians and 3 white lesbians, and was definitely founded as a way to kind of infiltrate into the queer and gay movement in the moment, and really saying that money bail, that criminalization, that all these things and our people facing oppression, like, is a gay issue. So we definitely wanted to make space for folks who are Black and brown, who are facing oppression and criminalization every day, to be able to be in these spaces and organize and bring their full selves and not having to be closeted. So Song is an LGBTQ feminist organization with core Black leadership. And we believe that until all of us are free, none of us are free. So that's why we're really wanting to move this work. Currently, we have campaigns to end money bail. So really connecting to our direct action to bail Black mamas and caregivers out of jail, and bring more awareness to that issue to end money bail and pretrial detention. We also have been doing research around campaigns to end the collaboration with local law enforcement and ICE, so Immigration and Customs Enforcement, because we know that police and ICE are the same beast under the prison industrial complex. But we do a lot of training, a lot of just skilling up and building community across the South, because we know that the South is where all this shit goes down and where all our people are, where we have roots, where we have community, and we want to be able to grow and build and organize in the South. So that's a little bit about Song, and hopefully you'll get to hear more about the work that we do. But thank you all so much for having us.
Thanks, Wednesday. I'm Beck. I use they, them pronouns, and I'm here as the representative of Pansy Collective. And so Pansy Collective is a DIY, decentralized, like queer LGBTQIA arts and music collective. Our biggest thing that we do is Pansy Fest. And it kind of started out as like a queer visibility type of thing. Like the punk scene in the South and in neighboring regions around Asheville has been pretty bro heavy, pretty homophobic, racist, and we were like trying to make space that was an anti-racist, anti-homophobic space just in the punk community. And then from that, it kind of started to build into more like Southern and rural coalition building, and then specifically around moving from like visibility to BIPOC reparations. So the first fest, we actually worked with Song's Black Mama Bailout, and that was like the first beneficiary we had. And TBP was another one. So it's so cool that we're all here right now. But yeah, it was kind of a way to engage like queer folks to put a public space that wasn't some liberal kind of, I don't know, uppity Asheville, people who are living here, you know what I mean? But yeah. So it was cool to like create a space where we felt okay around each other, where we could have hard conversations, and also like where we could bring some of the like anarchist principles and things like that in a kind of more tangible way into the punk scene, where it's like, okay, we got all these lyrics that are like, fuck this, like hate cops, all of that. But also, do you know about prison books? Do you want to sign up and do some, do you know about Black Mama Bailout? So, having people tabling there at all of our shows and events was really big, making sure we have Narcan, doing harm, like bringing in harm reduction into the scene, just kind of trying to like the spaces that we have idealistically in our head as like a queer scene, just trying to make it happen to the best of our ability. And so we've been around since 2017. And it was such a bummer last year. We were like getting ready for a really cool event with Hot Bits. It was going to be like a really cool coalition building there with like sex workers' rights and having a really cool, like, I don't know, sex positive space, which was like something new for Pansy. And it kind of just went all down because of COVID, of course. But we're still meeting together. We're still organizing. We, try to coalition build where we can. It's not looking like events around music and art right now. It's more like, okay, let's do a noise demo at the jail with, Charlotte Uprising. How can we like be outside and distance and really do the work that we believe in, which is like mutual aid, it's love, it's like anti-prison, it's not queer assimilationist, right? So it hasn't been so much festy, like punk stuff going on, but we're still here doing it. And super stoked to be here. Thanks for having us.
This is the Final Straw Radio, and you're hearing a panel discussion of Western North Carolina activists from the recent UNCA queer conference entitled Fitting In and Sticking Out. More info in our show notes.
Thanks everyone for introducing yourselves and the groups and giving an overview. And it's really interesting too just to see where these local regional groups have intersected and worked together. My first question beyond the introduction is specifically linking to like Asheville, Western North Carolina, a larger region, the South. What do you think Southern queers need, and how does your work try to meet those needs? And you can, get as specific to our town as you want, or think more regionally.
I'll go ahead. I think one of the things pre-pandemic when events were happening was just having a queer focused event that you didn't have to pay for, that it was like sliding scale and all of the money, it wasn't, going to this model of building up. It was just going to go into the hands of folks who need it. But the fact that you didn't have to show up and pay, I feel like everything else in this area, in those queer spaces too, it's like pay to play situation, and it's not really inviting, from a class perspective, but also just like those spaces aren't necessarily where like I want to be anyways, right? Like I want to be in a space where it doesn't matter how I'm dressed, how I look, if I can afford it. So just creating those spaces, I think, and something that I just think of like resources and education and coalition building as something, there's a lot going on in the South trying to make it happen, but it's much more of an uphill battle, I think, compared to West Coast, East Coast, right? And so, doing, like tabling events and stuff like that, but also like teach-ins where we learn how to do like jail support or, like fun stuff too. Like, do you want to learn how to screen print? Just having this like open space. You don't have to pay to get in. You don't have to know everybody. You can just come in and people are going to be like, hey, what's up? Welcome to the teach-in. And you're like already welcome at the door in a place where people can share ideas and it's not coming from this hierarchical, like, I'm going to educate everybody in this space. It's everybody has something they can bring to it. So I think that's one part that Pansy Collective comes from for sure.
Adrian, that made me think like what Beck was saying, thinking about like kind of the educational aspect and like maybe that fits in the mission of Youth Outright connecting to young people or.
Yeah, a couple of things were coming up for me when Beck was sharing. The first thing that came up for me around education and teach-ins is I feel like young people really need us adults to step up and educate ourselves, frankly. I think that our young people are often in the position either at school or with their families where they have to educate adults around them about sex and gender or racial justice or any number of social movements that are happening in our intersectional community, right? And so something that breaks my heart, but also makes me really proud is watching these young people really articulately say what they need to say to these adults, right? It's impressive. It's great. And also, come on, adults, what are we doing? And so, where that brings in Youth Outright is we're in the process of developing relationships with Buncombe County schools to provide training to all of their counselors and social workers, right? From the adults, providing them training about how to support young people. And we may compensate young people to record their experiences or, provide some amount of input in there, but we don't want them to have to expend that emotional labor and potentially re-traumatize themselves in entering a space where they have to teach their teacher, right? And so I think that there's a big need for adult allies to step up into this place of peer educator for, the people in their community and having these conversations. For the folks who do want to engage in those conversations, we're hosting every third Monday a space called Continuum, which is an intergenerational conversation for supporting specifically gender and sexual minority young people. And so that's a space where people can engage in conversation with the community there. But, we obviously have a little bit more of a focus on young people, right? So part of our work last summer, we did a direct action training in Carrier Park, right? And so we brought together a small cohort of young people and we were socially distanced and talked about what power mapping looks like, talked about some of, what are some of the changes they want to see in the community. And they identified the trans panic defense, right? They said that the trans panic defense is something that we think is abhorrent and needs to go away. And that's super valid. They also picked a hard one. But, I think that having spaces like that, centering the young people's vision, is really what they're asking for. And again, I'll go back to self-determination, right? And I think that when we allow young people to set the waypoint, we realize that a lot more is possible, right? As adults, I think we get a little bit salty, we get a little bit jaded and cynical. We'll never get there, right? So I think young people need us to tap into that imagination, tap into that vision, and support that, right? As well as stepping up to educate ourselves and understand that, I'm still learning neopronouns, y'all. I'm still, there's a lot going on and culture is always changing. So I think they need humility from us, right? They need us to recognize that, to disrupt that adultism in ourselves, right? There's always this dominant culture belief that adults know what's best for young people. They might know what's best for us. Let's look at our planet and what the young environmental activists are saying, right? There's so many ways to look at this and where young people really have the answers. So I think we need to take a seat and listen and then start making some moves from there.
Thinking of the youth identifying problems that they want to attack made me think also about the kind of particular terrain that we have in the South, given the kind of Republican legislative power and the way that they can kind of steamroll anti-trans, anti-gay policies. And I don't know if maybe that's something that Monse, you could talk about in terms of the work that Song's doing, because it's Song is a Southern thing, and there's simultaneously kind of invisibilization of queerness in the South, but also this huge social war being waged by the state against queer people in the South. So yeah, that was a way to try to throw it to you if you have some ideas.
Yeah, for sure. I could definitely speak on that a little bit. Yeah, and I would say the South is a region of both great despair and historical trauma, but is also great organized resistance and resilience and magic. We really organize in this region because we want to build up, and because we are a part of a long legacy of organizers and cultural workers, freedom fighters who have been committed to the South. And this is the place where folks live, where folks build their lives, where they love, where they organize, and continue to build their families regardless of all the things and history that it has. And I really would want to highlight that resistance piece, because there has been so much resistance that has happened in the South. And I think that's the beauty of it. I think that folks, we're naming that we organize in the South and we have that kind of Southern hospitality where we can find our people, where we can create the potlucks and invite folks in, and making sure that our neighbors have what they need, that our community is good, and we are doing mutual aid, and we are doing those things. And yeah, and there's also all the things against us too. But I think that organizing in the South, to me, is about kind of like that resilience that you're like, I'm not leaving this place because this is where my legacy is, my history is. And a lot of the times that like negative and like racist rhetoric is highlighted in the South, but I think like right alongside with it is like where we grow, like where we are making everything out of nothing, and we are doing that pushback, and we are seeing some wins. And I think we have been able to see some wins, like even specifically throughout this year, like folks organizing and doing the uprisings. Like we saw so many wins from that, like where folks, like we are literally, everyone was talking about like, what does it mean to defund the police? Like, what does it mean to like believe in a world where we don't have policing, where we don't have jails and prisons? And I think that that is because of years and years worth of organizing. It didn't happen just out of nothing, and like folks rioted and like stood up for what they believed in just like overnight. I think it has been years of oppression and resilience that ignited folks to continue that conversation. And I think that the work is not by any means done yet, but definitely we're seeing the fruits of those commitments and those sacrifices happen. And I think it's up to us here in the South to continue to say like, fuck that. I don't know if I can cuss on here, but fuck that. Like, we're going to keep fighting, and we're going to keep doing what our ancestors wanted us to do, and what rightfully we have to do. So, but yeah, and I think in Asheville, like there are so many nonprofits and like so many folks already organizing, and there is a great need for folks to organize. And we definitely saw that even locally in Asheville, when like we need to hold local and county government accountable. Like we saw that in the summer. We saw demands of Black and Brown organizers being ignored. We saw that there is a big need. Like we can't, in Asheville at least, we can't hide behind liberal organizing and expect things to move. I think that we have to continue to push and continue to make space for Black and Brown organizers and for demands to move, so that we can organize and build the world we want to live in, even here on a local level. And I think that what Song has to offer, at least here in Asheville, is like training, skill up opportunities, like this 28-year-old legacy of folks who have been fighting and organizing in the South, because the South is their home, and definitely connection to those folks all across the South, and years of like trans and queer abolitionist organizing. So that's what I have to say.
Thanks. And then, building on that idea, like how the sort of queer communities in the South can get invisibilized in the sort of racist and bigoted ideas of the South, I was going to use that to sort of transition to the work that you're doing, Leroy, with Transmission Prison Project, because also a community that gets invisibilized is the people who are incarcerated, and specifically people like trans and queer people who are incarcerated. And I don't know if you have something to say about that in terms of like the way that you're working with them to like get their voices out or get their needs met, because that's also a site of like tremendous resistance, building off what Monse was saying.
Yeah, I think that there's both so much potential here, and in full transparency, so much room for TPP to continue growing in ways that move beyond where the reality of, most of our work to date has, even as an abolitionist group, typically shown up as service provision, where we're not as involved on the policy end of things or able to keep up with all of the specifics of what is happening in this state in the South that's specifically targeting these queer and trans prisoners. We, have occasionally popped in to like offer a statement here or there about things that have happened on the federal level. Like in 2018, there was this change to the transgender offender manual from the Bureau of Prisons that really fucked over a lot of, altered the safety of trans folks in prison across the country. But as far as specific to the South, I personally don't feel like I am informed enough to be able to say where, we have as a project not yet had the capacity to orient towards how can we show up more and do more coalition building and outreach beyond our little silo of what this project has been maintaining over the years. But I think that that's the real growth edge for us right now, and where the conversation has really been building over the last several years, as we've gone from basically like myself and like one other person. When I first joined this organization, we sort of went through a period of so much burnout and turnover 7 years ago that the last 7 years have been really just building back up our own base and trying to just keep up with the mail. We have like 100 to 150 pieces of mail on average that we get a month. And so we've sort of been stretching to make space to have conversations within our group that are more than just how do we sustain our own morale in this work, and how do we actually network with some of these bigger, juicier, more challenging questions of what does it mean to be abolitionists doing books to prisoners work. And I think that networking with other folks in the South, like Song, like Pansy Collective, like Youth Outright, is really where the work is headed for us, so that we can kind of use the best of like what everyone else is already tapped into on sometimes more of the policy end of things, sometimes more the grassroots end of things, but just where people have their ear to the ground in places that we don't always. I will say, as I kind of alluded to, I think in my first answer, and maybe this is foreshadowing for like another question that I don't know is still coming up about like challenges of working in the South. But I think that the irony is that for longer than I have been involved with this project, North Carolina specifically has been one of the states that has banned us from Transmission Prison Project specifically from sending mail in. And we have, for the cop who may be sitting in this room right now, this is the time where I'm going to say like, fuck you and you can leave this call. But, we have done what we've needed to do to get folks books that they've requested. Like we still get requests all the time from prisoners in North Carolina. And we've basically just found some ways to fly a little lower on the radar when mailing those books back to people. But things like we can't use our letterhead. We don't use our mailing address when we return those. And so there's room for us to potentially challenge that. I mean, in the last 7 years, again, as a group, we have not had the capacity to necessarily even investigate, like, is this really still a thing? Like, could we run a campaign to get this overturned? And so that's where having a real upsurge of interest in prison abolition in the last year has been starting to put some more wheels under what feels possible for us in terms of maybe doing some bigger work than has really just been on the table for us again, and just trying to like keep up with the need that has been there. Not to fall into like capitalist supply demand lingo, but I mean, the reality is like the prison system is a part of capitalism, and we are often like in our own constraints that are placed upon us by the nature of the prison industrial complex. So there's this real tension between like, how do we ensure that our baseline commitment to just getting people the books that they are asking for is being met, while also being like, is that in and of itself abolitionist? It's like we really situate what we're doing as centering people's humanity and really just restoring that sense of dignity and autonomy to people, that like having information is something that we believe everyone should have, and having an access to pleasure is something that everyone should have a way to expand their own minds beyond, what's often a cell smaller than a lot of people's bathrooms. How do we, again, just connect the dots of the bigger constellation of how do we keep these prisons from becoming kinder and friendlier to trans people, whether that's in the South or around the whole rest of the country, towards how do we really shrink this system into non-existence?
This is the Final Straw Radio, and you're hearing a panel discussion of Western North Carolina activists from the recent UNCA queer conference entitled Fitting In and Sticking Out. More info in our show notes.
Yeah, so jumping off of the obstacle point, that was a question that I had prepared, and I'm thinking also of just specifying a little bit, because it's come up, and this is the place we're in, like, you know, not post pandemic, but in the middle of the pandemic hit, right, and like changed the terrain for organizing for everyone. So that obviously is an obstacle, and I'd be interested to hear how a little more about how all of you dealt with that, and also potentially on the plus side, like the way the uprisings, the rebellions last year affected the kind of energy and work that you're doing, because that's also something you've all been mentioning in terms of the hearing more about abolition. So obstacles, but also like the recent sort of things that have occurred that have changed the nature of organizing.
I'm happy to kick it off. I think that, yeah, definitely what has been shared is definitely what we've been experiencing too within song. I think even the election was a huge obstacle. I think that brought up so many conversations, but also like we were able to run a Free the Vote program within song in particular parts of the South where we were doing voter registration in the jails for folks who are incarcerated, trying to get absentee ballots in there. And we also faced that same, like, trying to mail stuff in, trying to get to talk to people. It was those same things. So I definitely resonate with that, like trying to navigate and even just reach our people who are inside, making sure that they know that we're out here, and just trying to communicate with them has been a barrier put up by the state. And I think it's very intentional, you know? They don't want us to talk to them. They don't want them to talk to us. So I would say I definitely resonated with that. And I think even, COVID in itself changed so many of the conditions which our folks were living in and organizing in too. And we, as song, like, definitely we're trying to figure out, like, is this the moment, like, to free them all? Like, are we trying to push for that? Like, get everyone out of jail? Like, of course they're not following the CDC guidelines. Of course they don't care about the people who are in there, and really trying to see, like, what ways that we could turn up on the state, and also keep our people safe from COVID. Like, we definitely started to do like car caravan actions, like honk-ins at the jails all across the South, like making sure, like, hey, like, we haven't forgotten about y'all out here, and trying to do that. Like, folks in Atlanta, in the Atlanta chapter, were definitely turning up and putting pressure so folks could be released. Like, if they didn't have to be there, of course nobody has to be there, but like if they were there pre-trial, that they should be free. So definitely trying to push on like the campaigns that we were already moving in relationships to, like, we need everyone out of that jail because it's just COVID in there. So yeah, I think that even our tactics of like organizing changed so much in finding our people and being able to do direct actions. Like, we were thinking a lot of like, what does it mean to continue to turn up on the state and keep our people safe from getting sick? Because we know that historically our people don't have access to healthcare. Like, our people don't trust the healthcare systems at all, and in fact have been victims of violence by the healthcare system. So all the things. And I think even just locally, some obstacles that have been coming up is also the fast-paced gentrification here in Asheville. Black and brown folks, especially queer, trans folks, are being pushed out of Asheville so quickly, so rapidly. And I think that that's also something that, like, my brain goes to is like, how are we, like, turning up against all these developers who are trying to take our towns, trying to take our people's homes? And how are we creating space for folks to continue to live here and work here and organize here in Asheville is something that I would love to get into with any of y'all. But yeah, some of the obstacles.
Thanks for sharing all of that, Monse. A lot of that really resonates. And I think that, what's coming up for me and the young folks that I work with is I think that we've really shifted into more of a survival mode, right? And so I feel like there's, sex ed and sexual violence prevention work was really integral to our programs before the pandemic. Like every single meeting, we'd talk about consent. Once we hit quarantine, kids were like, we just need to hang out with each other. Like we need a little bit less educational stuff. And we stepped back a little bit because they didn't have the capacity to keep learning. And they were also doing virtual school, right? I think the capacity for everybody, right? Not just young people, just really got lowered. And, I have been fielding a lot more crisis calls over the past year. We have young people who are stuck at home in transphobic families, right? Abusive families. And so, we move from, potentially thinking about targeting a trans inclusive policy at school to, I might get kicked out of my home, right? And so I think that's one of the challenges for us is that while we try to build power within the youth community, so many of our young folks are just dealing with a different level of marginalization by the pandemic, right? One thing I'd point to is our GSA clubs, right? Like before the pandemic, there were upwards of 35 clubs across North Carolina. Now we're under 25. And a lot of those 25 are folks who have registered, but like their club isn't really meeting right now, or maybe they don't have the tools to meet digitally, or, they're running their meeting, but they're only getting 5 of the 20 or 30 people that used to be coming to their meeting, right? So there's this really big challenge in reconnecting with all of our young folks that have been a part of this network and making sure they're all right? We launched a mutual aid fund over the past year to support young folks 24 and under who were economically impacted by the pandemic. And we've distributed about $14,000 now, mostly to young folks who are housing insecure, and a good number of them are already homeless. And so, in my conversations with the McKinney-Vento liaisons who work within the Buncombe County School District and support the homeless youth there, they told me that they expected to see the homeless youth population balloon, maybe even double over, the course of the pandemic due to just the economic impacts, right? And the family impacts, again, putting, trans young people back at home in spaces that aren't safe for them. So all of those things are hard, but I do want to add a silver lining that has come out of some of these pivots, right? We moved to digital programming pretty much within a week, right? It was pretty quick, but what was really awesome about it was a lot of our young people took a lot of initiative, right? They're like, oh, Discord? Yeah, I can make a server. I can make you a robot. I can make you all these things, right? And it was incredible and inspiring to see these young people step up to the plate. Wow, a sports metaphor. How butch. Okay. That was weird. That doesn't happen a lot. So, these young people really stepped up to support each other and advocate for themselves, right? That's been really incredible. And the other thing that comes from that, right? In the beginning of the pandemic, our groups were smaller, but they were rural people. They were POC folks, right? And so we were actually getting to these young people who really need our services a little bit more. And not to say that Asheville young folks don't need our services, right? We're here for them as well, but there tend to be more GSAs within Buncombe County. There tend to be more supportive adults within Buncombe County. And so to see young people from Candler, Lake Lure, Cherokee, these other places checking into our call, that's a huge impact for me and for, I think, the folks in the community. I think that moving out of the pandemic, as we slowly start to, we're going to be keeping a lot of these digital organizing strategies that we've developed and need to find this balance between, okay, we've created access to our rural programs and there's this thing that's lacking from our in-person programs that we need to bring back. But I tell you, I'm not going to remove all the digital programs because I like having those rural kids around.
This is the Final Straw Radio, and you're hearing a panel discussion of Western North Carolina activists from the recent UNCA queer conference entitled Fitting In and Sticking Out. More info in our show notes.
I can jump back in. Yeah, I'm really feeling the themes of like COVID challenges plus like weird COVID boons that no one necessarily saw coming. Yeah, at the very start of the pandemic, we definitely went into rapid response mode in a way that like isn't very typical for us. And again, like wasn't necessarily sustainable for us. But I think as Monse already touched on, everyone's familiar with this, I think on the global level, but for those of us, especially with our finger on the pulse of what life inside of prisons is like, it was just like watching this storm rolling in times 1,000. It was just like the contagion of this is going to kill so many people so rapidly. And there was also this potential like no one had really ever seen before for these mass releases. And so again, even though that's not something that we as a group necessarily had a lot of power to help push for, I mean, I think individuals within our group are kind of like here and there tapped into other campaigns outside of the work of TPP. But what we did do was reformatted a pamphlet that was a collaboration between Blue Ridge Anarchist Black Cross and Asheville Prison Books, which was basically just an informational, like 2 to 4 pager about what is COVID and how can you keep yourself safe. And obviously there were ways where we were like, we don't know if people are going to be able to apply this. I mean, obviously there is no PPE. There certainly was no PPE inside of prisons at the beginning of the pandemic. We were worried if people were even going to have soap. Hand sanitizer was like not allowed for a lot of folks because of alcohol. But we were like, we don't even know what people are being told at this point. So it seems like the least we could do to just share what we were hearing as we were hearing it on the outside with those that we love on the inside, to just say like, this is what we know so far about this virus. And this is what we are hearing about what you can do to keep yourself safe as much as possible. And we realize that a lot of this may not be possible for y'all. The flip side of, what those pamphlets offered was a sliver of hope for those that were able to receive them about some of what was happening in terms of folks being released in the South, actually, as well as around the country. And while that did not happen, I think as much as a lot of us in the abolition movement hoped that, it could have gone further, there were also some prison breaks, and there were also just stories of people freeing themselves from the cages that they were in. And so there were some little blurbs about that. We also had some of those pamphlets bounce back, and we assumed that that was for that reason. There was like 1 or 2 that came back to us that something on the return to sender said something along the lines of like, this is a threat to our security, and that's why this wasn't let in. And so, it's like not really surprising because we know that knowledge is a threat, and prisons don't want prisoners to even think about the fact that they might one day have the power to liberate themselves, let alone be granted clemency. So, the vast majority of them we think reached folks that we intended them to get. But we also weren't sure for a while when we were going to have access to our office, because as the original shutdowns were going on, like I said, we're out of the back of Downtown Books and News, and we lost access to our space for the first 3-4 months that things were going on. So part of those pamphlets too was this very kind of frightening just disclosure that we were like, hey, we don't know when we are going to be able to send you books because there's just a freeze on our ability to maintain this right now. But we want you to know that you are in our hearts and we are thinking of you. And even just being able to send that little bit of personal love to folks, that in and of itself, I think, was where we were able to put our hearts forward at the start of this pandemic and let people know, like Monse, you were saying again, like you are not forgotten even in this. And we'll be back with you as soon as we can be. And so, yeah, it took some time, I think, for everybody kind of get their feet back under them again. But by the summer last year, we were starting to socially distance, gather ourselves in the park to just reorganize our core group. And then as we started to launch our packaging parties back up, which is how we kind of make room for more community engagement than just our regular core folks who come and pick out the books. We, in the pre-pandemic times, used to do this out of Firestorm Books and Coffee, where we would take the books that were ready to be wrapped up, and we would just do a big, almost holiday style wrapping, where we just brown paper bag everything and address stuff and tape it up, and then it's ready to go to the post office. And we started to do that outside, also in Carrier Park, so that we could continue to do the work. And really, I think this is where this work gets really intersectional. I think that with everything that happened with the uprisings of the summer and abolition starting to be talked about more and more, we started to see more people show up at those outdoor packaging parties than we had ever seen before. And we have been continuing to get new interest through our Instagram, through our email inbox. And yeah, I think that that's where the last year has presented some really unusual but exciting opportunities for where we're now positioned with more folks plugging in all of the time than we've previously had. So that's the upside of things. Beck, you want to get in on this?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, it's pretty quick and easy. COVID really threw a wrench in like everything we do. It was we created physical spaces for queer community to come together and learn and share joy and, art and music. So yeah, we really were at a loss for how to adapt. And none of us were in a place where we were like willing to switch to digital. So we're like, okay, what can we do right now? We had like applied for a mini grant from the Trans Justice Project, and we got it. And we're like, oh, dope, but there's not a fest going on. So what are we going to do? And so we decided to do a kind of like reparations drive project, community outreach type thing where we used all those funds from that grant to BIPOC artists who are now like without work. So focusing on Black and Indigenous, queer and trans artists and making sure they're getting their needs, uplifting the work that they're doing, from a distance, and also just like, literally just like fundraising for them and having our own reparations pool every month. So that kind of shifted that way. I think a lot of it though, like Pansy Collective as individuals was just like showing up in the summer, showing up in the street, showing up for aftercare type stuff, showing up where we could as individuals for our friends and our community. And so, yeah, I think, as things start kind of shifting and maybe outdoor meetups and stuff is possible, it'll kind of start to go back to what Pansy's used to doing. But really, it's just been, as a collective, oh my cat, as a collective, just kind of being there for each other and for the folks in town and showing up just as people has been the work, just giving love in a really isolated time.
Thanks everyone for going into that. I want to ask maybe like a final question that would have two parts and then leave room for anyone here who wants to directly ask you individually or collectively questions. So I'm going to put a couple things together and hopefully this will work. So on the one hand, like we see queerness kind of getting more visibility and inclusion and representation. And I'm wondering, because all the work that y'all are doing is still like on the terrain that is disruptive for systems of power, state control. So I'm sort of just interested in what you think, what queerness still holds that's disruptive or liberatory, and then kind of putting that into like what sort of coalitional projects you envision your groups doing in the future.
Right now, the one sentence that's coming to my head is like, pink capitalism sucks, right? And I don't have a whole lot more beyond that right now in this moment. No, I think that these sort of acceptability politics that's happening in like the big LGB, sometimes T circles, right, is rather sex negative, right? So I think there's growth we could do there together in coalition building. I think that this is probably because of the particular lens that I approach this work, but I see a lot of ageism and adultism generationally, right? I see a lot of skepticism from my elders on the vision that my young folks have, right? And sometimes I look to my elders to say like, look, I don't quite see how all the dots connect, but can you help me connect the dots for these young people? And I need that support from our transcestors, right? And so I think that's part of the coalition building that can happen. I think that also we see a lot of like white LGBTQ representation, right? So I think there's a lot of work that we can do around, centering BIPOC experience and what they need, right? So I would really love to see more intergenerational coalitions between the different LGBT and racial justice serving organizations, I think that could be really, really fruitful. And I'm just kind of curious what other folks are thinking too.
Yeah, I think you hit it spot on for me, Adrian. And yeah, I think that there are a lot of visible spaces and like spaces made for queer and trans folks here in Asheville, at least, but they are mostly white spaces. And I think that just making spaces for Black and Brown folks to lead the work, for Black and Brown folks to just even come together and organize is necessary. And I would love to collaborate with folks and just like creating those spaces, like finding the folks that are looking for the spaces and being able to kind of support and bring and find joy to bring our beautiful queer selves and organize together. So I think that that's where we have a lot of room to grow, where I could see song and like collaborating with folks. And I think even just like also language, I'm very passionate about like language justice and that we need to be organizing not only in English, because queer and trans folks like aren't only white, don't only speak English. And I think that these identities can be very intersectional and like folks are trying to do all the things. And yeah, so I think like creating more spaces that are language accessible, that are like culturally accessible, and that folks want to come to. Because I think that there are so many white, queer, trans spaces in Asheville that a lot of times like my folks don't want to be in, that I don't want to be in. And I think that there's a lot of room to grow and a lot of space for collaboration where we can make these spaces together.
I'll go ahead. Yeah, thank you, Monse and Adrian. I think all of y'all's responses, and also looking at what I'm thinking of how Asheville in particular, and a lot of like liberal Southern cities loves to, you know, show its pride in like, we just hired a lesbian cop. Look at this, look at this girl boss who just joined the local government. Like when we look at our roots as like, and when we look at queer oppression in a timeline, like we have all of the same evils, all of the same oppressive entities are still the same. And no matter how like pink or queer, whatever we make them appear, they're still creating the same evils and the same oppressions. There was a TikTok of a local lesbian police officer that got really big. And I was just like, I know her. I've seen you arrest some queer folks before. Like, why? And your TikTok fame is cute. So yeah, just when we really look at like all of these intersections, like we can't be pro gay cops while gay cops are arresting Black queer people, brown queer people, are incarcerating and deporting brown queer people, Black queer people, Indigenous queer people. All of these evils are still there. If we put queer in front of it, it does not change that. So, and that's the same for like, pink capitalism, like you talked about, Adrian. Like, sure, I can go to Target in July and expect to find some like rainbow t-shirts, right? But they're still made in fucking sweatshops. Just because we put a coat of pink on it doesn't change the systems of oppression and the same status quo that we're really trying to fight against. And when we think of like STAR, Street Transvestite Action Revolutionaries, there it is, STAR. And like that awesome organizing that was happening, it was focusing on people who were incarcerated, it was focusing on trans, Black, and brown people. It was led by trans, Black, and brown people. Like that is what, to me, that is where revolution is heading and has always been from. It's not going to be from the lesbian white cop on TikTok who Asheville loves and had a meet and greet with a rainbow flag behind her. Like, no, that's not going to be it. And thinking of, like Monse, you talked about earlier, there's the gentrification that's rapidly pushing Black and brown folks out of Asheville. Like, that's another thread that I don't see a lot of queer organizing, like really looking at, is that class piece, that racism and class piece, right? Yeah, like there's a Save Charlotte Street, going on in town to save, like, which is like important, right? This is a whole community, but it's like white folks that are like affluent, and there's a lot of buildup and organizing around that. I'm like, what about all the brown folks that were pushed out? What about all the Black folks that were pushed out during the 90s? So starting to like bring all of that in together and look at that like same root that is there, instead of just trying to like paint it pink and call it cute. Yeah, that's a direction I would love for all of us to be heading in.
Oh, yeah, paint it pink and call it cute. There is a slogan to be dissected. Yeah, I feel like that was kind of where my brain was going as far as like, where is the liberatory potential of queerness still? Is that actually still a thing? Or where is social capital and like social hierarchy kind of just subverting this work into something really superficial, and where I see popularity as like the potential thing that's like drawing people into this and social cred more than what this work is actually about. I think that's something that has been a really disturbing trend to try and assess, where it's like, we have a very trendy logo, some might say, that was designed for us in the last few years, and like to see our social media suddenly like popping off has been really exciting. And it's like, at the same time that we want people to come towards us and enter into this work, in the time that I have been involved with TPP, this has been a primarily white-led organization, and it has primarily been white folks involved. We have not had a lot of people of color come to us and say that they want to be involved in our work. And that isn't to say none, but I think that there are uncomfortable questions that I'm okay with being uncomfortable about, that for me, when I think about these things, I'm like, I just continue to sit with more questions than I have answers for. What does it mean for us to just continue to listen to other folks in the community, to continue to show up for other POC and Black-led organizations in Asheville, so that we're not just perpetuating, this part of the problem. And, I've sat with this question of, if at some point this work needed to completely dissolve in order for something new to take form that was not the folks who have been leading this project for the time that I've been here to occur, I think that's part of what change is like death and rebirth, and not being so attached to what we have carved out, what we have created, that we can't still be humble and know that we, again, don't have all the answers. So I'm excited for, where we continue to get to connect as, these four groups that are in this panel. I'll say, as far as like networking goes, TPP actually just got an email from Georgia chapter of Song like last night about them wanting to start some Books to Prisoners work for LGBTQ folks in Georgia. And so we basically just sent them like everything that we know about how to do this work, because that was what they were asking us. And we are really like, yes, please, there need to be more groups that are specifically serving LGBTQIA folks that are incarcerated, because again, whether it's in the South or anywhere in the country, that remains like one of the most marginalized groups in prison. And we know that so many of those folks are Black and Brown and Indigenous. And yeah, I think that more and more youth are starting to come to us. We have our first ever high school intern right now, and she's been getting ready to plug us to the Racial Justice Coalition at her high school. So I feel like a lot of what's being named as far as intersectionality in this conversation is really like coming to the surface, and it's an exciting time for, what's possible right now. But there is a lot of co-optation at the same time. And so, yeah, I really hesitate to say with great confidence, like, yeah, there is some, I don't know. It's like the language might have to change. And I think that that's actually like the place where I want to insert this quote that I pulled from, for the old heads who still know who Critical Resistance is, this anthology Abolition Now from 2008, which at the time was the 10-year anniversary of Critical Resistance, National Abolitionist Organizing Group. I mean, at this point, it's like been more than 10 years since this book came out, but this is a quote from Alexander Lee, the founder and director of the Transgender, Gender Variant, and Intersex Justice Project, or TGI Justice Project, out of California. Alexander Lee says, "As we go forward, We should expect to be forced to discard language that limits this movement to prison and the prison industrial complex in favor of descriptors that foster prickly coalitions with others who don't see themselves as anti-prison, but who do believe in the sacred nature of human dignity, however imperfectly expressed in practice. The prison abolition movement must expand its arms to envelop the same people who fight for housing but demonize prisoners, who protest war but love to watch CSI, people who march for civil rights but yell trans slur at trans women, and queers who demand the death penalty when yet another one of us is murdered. We should move into these other sectors and act as the lodestar pulling everyone towards the ultimate goal of building a world where liberation is the status quo. When we achieve these goals, the abolition of prisons will just be the icing on the cake.
Thanks for sharing that. Powerful words. And yeah, I guess maybe if we can just transition. I mean, I'm really grateful for all of you kind of speaking out of your experience and knowledge of doing this movement work that's so important. All right, well, thank you, everyone.
And now some words from anarchist prisoner Sean Swain.
What you say, what you say, what you say, what?
I've been told by some that I'm extremely sectarian. I hold radical and extremist positions, and I vilify those who hold opposing views. It's been suggested to me that I need to be more open-minded, that I should try to understand the perspectives of folks on the far end of the political spectrum from me. Perhaps they're right. Perhaps I've been too hard on the radical alt-right fascist-leaning folks who vote for Trump and support Civil War monuments and think COVID is a hoax. See, there I go. I got snarky again. So, what I did, I spent a weekend trying to explore the far right's perspectives, putting myself in their proverbial shoes. Wingtips, no doubt. Richard Nixon loved wingtips. I laid around for a weekend reading Ayn Rand, immersing myself in the QAnon theories, and watching conservative television. I made every effort to be open and empathetic. So this is what I learned. First, I read about 900 pages of Ayn Rand, which was about 10% of the book. I learned a lot from it. I learned that in order to pawn off conservative ideals as freedom, it takes 9,000 pages. And at the end, it probably still doesn't make sense. I don't know. I've never met anyone that finished Rand's works. Maybe that's why Atlas shrugged. Which takes me to the QAnon theory. According to QAnon, a cabal of liberal, satanic child molesters are running the world and doing a poor job of it. And it's only the pseudo-fascists who can save us. Pseudo-fascists like Donald Trump, who greets women like he's picking up a six-pack. Or Trump's defender, Ohio Representative Jim Jordan, who concealed the serial rapes of a wrestling coach at Ohio State University. Or Florida Representative Matt Gaetz, who is being investigated for sex trafficking a 17-year-old girl. It's very confusing. I can't tell the good guys from the bad guys. It seems like the satanic child molesters are going to save us from the satanic child molesters. The other ones, I mean. And so we arrive at the conservative television programming, which for me is composed of Fox News on Sunday morning and a marathon of Ancient Aliens on the History Channel. Both Fox News and Ancient Aliens are excellent for understanding Trump's inspiration for Space Force. I hope Burst hits that reverb button when I say those words. Ready? Space Force. For me, it's sometimes hard to tell the two programs apart. It's the hairstyles. I know this sounds very superficial. I know. And this is just me. But I can't seriously consider any theory espoused by someone who uses $80 worth of hair products to make their hair defy gravity in very weird ways. Fox News and Ancient Aliens are both frequently populated with weird hair people, and I can't follow what they're saying. First, the I just licked the light socket hairstyle is just so distracting that I'm watching how it moves around and I miss what's said. But the other part is, if your personal judgment is so bad that you can't see that your hairstyle looks like a dead octopus floating in the water. I have to be skeptical and presume you have no sense at all. Hey, ancient alien theorist, 1982 called, Flock of Seagulls lead singer wants his hair back. Full disclosure, I styled my hair like Duran Duran in the 1980s, but I don't do it now. And if I did, you should ignore my commentary. Anyway, what I learned. Ancient aliens built the pyramids and influenced Abe Lincoln with visions from the future. There's a secret base on the dark side of the moon, and the government has alien DNA ever since that crash at Roswell. And that's just what I got from Fox News. I swear I tried to give this fair and open-minded consideration. I swear I did. I try to be fair and open-minded with everyone. When I had my face ground into the floor by the fart goblins at Toledo Correctional, and I got sent down to the prison system's nut house, I met a guy there whose fillings in his teeth channeled the voices of Oprah Winfrey and Bill Clinton in his head. I gave him the benefit of the doubt until they got Oprah's hometown wrong. Dealing with the right-wingers and their ideas is a lot like dealing with the guy channeling Oprah at the nut house. They're just operating from a really whack set of assumptions. And you can't tell them that they're delusional, that Hillary Clinton doesn't sacrifice crack babies on a pentagram behind a bar in New York, or that ancient alien lizard people don't have an insidious liberal agenda, or the voice of Oprah isn't really insisting that we check our tire pressure right now. It's just a complex of wackadoodlery becoming increasingly dissonant with our reality. What the alt-right and neocons call alternative facts, a trained shrink would call delusion. Crazy people insist that their alternative facts are more real than yours too. It doesn't become less crazy if you have more people subscribing, whether it's 10 or 1,000 or a few million. I'm going to start working on my own conspiracy theory, something just as outrageous as satanic child molesters and lizard people from space. I'll throw in the Kennedy assassination, the Catholic Church hiding the DNA of Jesus, clones of Hitler, and the impending zombie apocalypse financed by none other than George Soros. There's nanobots in your food, digital messaging from your TV to reprogram your brain, and how the secret ninjas who really murdered Elvis were behind 9/11, and they worked for Dick Cheney. It all goes together. If half of the American populace will buy anything, we might as well sell. This is anarchist prisoner Sean Swain in exile from Ohio at Buckingham Correctional in Dillwyn, Virginia. If you're listening, you are the resistance.
You can write to Sean Swain by addressing letters to Sean Swain, number 201 5638, Buckingham Correctional Center, P.O. Box 630, Dillwyn, Virginia, 23936. He has a book that is available from Little Black Cart Distro. His zines can be found online at theanarchistlibrary.org, and other of his writings and updates are still available at swainrocks.org. Sean has a complaint pending before the Inter-American Human Rights Commission for the torture that he suffered at the hands of the state of Ohio. He is also collecting letters of support for his bid for clemency. You can find more details on Instagram by following Swainiac1969. You can find his past writings, recordings of his audio segments, and updates on his case at seanswain.org, or now follow him on Twitter at SwainRocks. Just a little update and housekeeping. Thank you so much to the folks that have continued to support the Patreon. We are still underway with the transcription. I think we're about at the cost every month of sustaining ourselves between that and the occasional additional merch purchase. If you would like to support those efforts, again, I'll just sort of ramble about how good it is to have transcription. It definitely makes it way more accessible to folks that have either hearing impairments or for whom auditory learning is not their preferred way of learning, or for whom English is a second language. Also, getting these interviews transcribed actually gets them searchable easily by all the web search engines out there, the web crawlers, so that they can be found by more people. It makes it easier for the process of translation. So rather than someone having to listen to the interview, transcribe it, and then translate that from there, they've just got this thing that they can work with. It's pretty awesome. And also for the folks that are out of range of free internet access, whether it be someone who is living off in a rural place and getting podcasts is just out of realistic realm for them, or someone in prison. Actually having a transcription available means that we can sneak these conversations into letters, and we can send in zines, or you could, print off one of the zines and leave it at a bus stop, or leave it at a laundromat, or leave it at a gas station or a grocery store, somewhere where people, congregate. Someone might be bored. Someone might want to pick up a random essay on some random subject. Anyway, so again, thank you so much. Through the Patreon, if you choose to support us, we have a bunch of different levels. Not a bunch. We got like 3 or 4 different levels, and they have various gifts that are associated. For anyone that's giving more than $10 a month, you'll get a zine in the mail once a month. I'm about to send out I'm not going to tell you what we're sending out because it's a surprise for the people that get it. But that content, like all of our other content, is never behind a paywall. So you don't have to pay to get it. It's just a nice little thank you to the folks that are contributing and paying for our transcription service. Other ways that you can support the show if you like us is tell people about it, do the stupid rating thing on iTunes and blah, 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 all that. You can order stickers or t-shirts from us or buttons. I personally really enjoy putting those packages together and sending them out to people. It's a random grab bag of materials. You can also support us by telling other people about the show, by sharing us on social media. You can support us by contacting us and showering us with praise. We've been getting more of that recently, which we really appreciate. And if you value the programming that we provide and you're in the US or somewhere else where it makes sense to have English language content on the radio, consider contacting a local community radio station on our behalf, saying, hey, I'm a listener. I think it's important that this be on the airwaves here. I want to hear these perspectives from, anti-authoritarian perspectives from the Horn of Africa about the genocide going on in Tigray. I want to hear the voices of prisoners talking about what they're experiencing and the organizing that they're doing. I want to hear this upcoming chat that we've got with an Indian anarchist about resisting the caste system. We've got a lot on offer, and really the beauty of community radio is that rather than these bubbles where on social media we come across the stuff that we follow or that the people that we follow are into and they share it with us, and so we get stuff that we already know about to a degree, or stuff that we're going to agree with, stuff that we like. Radio, even though people are more and more going with streaming platforms, radio is still an opportunity to roll the dice and hit someone's ears who's not expecting to, whether it's someone behind bars, someone driving around in their Uber or their truck job, or someone in their kitchen. It's kind of random. It's kind of beautiful that way. In any case, thank you again to all the people that are supporting us. I've taken enough time of yours, and I'm really excited for some of the upcoming shows. Get in touch if you want to. Thank you. This is The Final Straw, and I'm Bursa Goodness. This show will later be archived at thefinalstrawradio.noblogs.org, and you can email us with questions and suggestions at thefinalstrawradio@riseup.net or thefinalstrawradio@protonmail.com. If you'd like to use any episode for your project or radio show, feel free to do so. Just send us an email to let us know. If you care to, you can send us letters at The Final Straw Radio, P.O. Box 6004, Asheville, North Carolina, 28816. This show is brought to you by Firestorm Books and Coffee. Located at 610 Haywood Road, Firestorm Books and Coffee is a worker-owned co-op in Asheville specializing in offbeat, underground, and independent literature. You can find a catalog of Firestorm's books and zines, plus a full calendar of events up at their website, firestorm.coop.